Hi, I'm Christian Baker, and you lovely people are watching Disastrous Science, and today we're going to be discussing the oh-so-horrible Great China Floods of 1931. Stay tuned. So for today's episode, we're going to break down our topic into 4 different sections, and they are the imposing weather patterns that caused the flood, the magnitude of the flood, in space and time, the impacts of the flood, societal and economic, and any mitigation or adaptation methods that were put into place afterwards. And I know a lot of my MEA 100 peers were not too happy about me having a 9-minute video last time, so in regards to time, let's move forward. So everyone knows that floods just don't happen randomly. There's usually some sort of inclement weather conditions that cause the rivers, lakes, streams, or ponds to overflow. But surprisingly, the underlying cause for this flood was a long-term relationship between human residing areas and nearby river basins. Potential flooding was always an issue faced by the people residing in the Yangtze region, and people ultimately came and transformed the alluvial and lacustrine landscape that was already existing. Because of our overly demanding human needs, we caused excessive deforestation, wetland reclamation, and the overextension of river dike networks. And for those of you who are curious, a river dike network is just an artificially constructed wall that is put into place just to regulate water levels. And these ultimately transform regular flood patterns, which were an integral feature of the fluvial ecosystem, and we turned these into destructive inundations, and this was a big no-no apparently for the people that occupied in large groups. That was a lot. Because growth and fluctuation in population exceeded this area's means of sustainability, the dike network struggled to withstand all of the pressure. Although the underlying floods were caused by a bizarre environmental history, the eventual presence of increased precipitation did not help. The winter in China during the 1930 through 1931 season had been specifically harsher than usual, and large deposits of snow and ice were left in the upper catchments of the river. These frozen reservoirs, I guess, decided that they couldn't breathe and they wanted to bust wide open, which by that I just mean that all the snow and the ice melted in the spring of 1931, and they merged with unusually heavy rainfall and engorging in the rivers and lakes, and this actually raised the water table. But that's not it, because the population did not know that a foreboding East Asian monsoon was preparing to take them by surprise in the summer, and it did just that. In an average year, the Yangtze Basin typically expected only 2 cyclonic storms, while 1931 brought with it 7. These storms in fact dumped the equivalent of 1.5 times the average annual volume of precipitation in just a month. That is ridiculous. By early August of 1931, one of the most populous regions in the world was completely underwater. Should I include a video clip of a tsunami overtaking the city? Probably not. Now that we've moved into the next discussion for today's topic, which is the magnitude of the flood in time and space, I want to start off by saying the flood took place over a 3-month period. With this extended amount of time, the flood covered 69,000 square miles of land, which is approximately the size of England. In addition to these monstrous consequences, 4 local weather stations reported at least 24 inches of rainfall in total. In addition to the flooding that was already going on and adding to the bodies of water, the Yellow River also burst and made the situation that much worse. I guess a lot of rivers were in coordinates with each other, because during this event, the Huai River also decided to overflow, and this only increased the magnitude of the area of the land that was affected. In fact, the highest levels of water that were recorded during the 3-month period were in Hankow at around 16 meters. Now that's just plain deadly. The date of peak for this awful disaster was actually August 18th, 1931. The events of the flood caused major consequences despite being an indirect and direct event. Now, moving away from the magnitude of the flood, we are now moving into the next discussion of our oh so awful topic. In discussing the social and economic impacts of this flood, I want to start off by saying that this is considered to be one of the deadliest and costliest natural disasters of all of the 20th century, and that says a lot given the last episode of Disastrous Science in which we discussed the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption. Because so many individuals in the region resided at subsistence level and relied on the Yangtze River for personal and farming needs, they were completely set for disaster during the peak of this flood. In southern China, the floods damaged a 500 square mile radius of land, and the waters left over 500,000 people homeless. Rice fields that dominated the landscape were completely demolished, and this caused individuals of the Wuhan and Nanjing population to starve to death, seeing as how these individuals were completely dependent on this rice fields. Within the first month of the flood, 150,000 people drowned due to the rising water levels in several low-lying areas. On a larger scope, over 28 million individuals were affected by this disaster, and of the 28 million, 3.7 million perished from either starvation or from drowning. Remember that Yellow River that I mentioned earlier in the discussion? Yeah, well, that was apparently a major source of trade for the region, and this weakened the population on an economic level. Huge losses were taken in the farming industry, and families were so desperate during the aftermath that they reverted to infanticide and even cannibalism. Yes,
Cannibalism.
Because so many individuals caught waterborne diseases such as cholera and typhus, death tolls in the populations began to rapidly increase, and this led to a crippling population decrease in China. The amount of money lost in farming is more of an aspect known by people versus the money in governmental aftermath and assistance. It is estimated that almost $900 million were lost in crops,
which is actually the equivalent of 14 billion US dollars today.
Yes, you guys, we,
and I mean the people who are still awake,
have made it to the last discussion for our topic, which are mitigation and adaptation efforts put into place in response for this deadly disaster. Several important responses and factors were put into place and proposed, mostly by the government after this event occurred. Majority of the government's disaster reliefs were taken over by the Sino-foreign organizations, such as the China International Famine Relief Commission,
CIFRC for short.
As the magnitude of this disaster became more and more evident, the government established the National Flood Relief Commission,
NFRC.
The NFRC made possible the generous effort to employ a number of Chinese and foreign experts, which included epidemiologist Wu Lian, health minister, public health employee John Grant, and hydraulic engineer Oliver Todd. Even famous aviators such as Charles and Ann Lindbergh became involved, seeing as how they were in charge of conducting an aerial survey of the land area that was damaged. Majority of responsibilities for the day-to-day management of the relief efforts were given to John Hope Simpson, who was an expert in British refugees, and he was actually sent by the League of Nations to assist in relief efforts. Thomas Harnsberger and others effectively assisted in the supervision of the rebuilding of river dike networks and helped in funding. Individuals actually began to propose ideas that outlined the constructing of waterworks to assist in the regulation of flooding, but these weren't actually put into place until 1954. And finally, there were a large number of river levees that were actually reconstructed with the intent of precision to help prepare for any potential floods in the future, and regulations on flood evacuation methods began to be enforced regularly among the individuals of the regions affected by the flood.
And I believe that is all for my discussion, so because I don't want to break the 6-minute mark, we're going to move into the outro.
This has been Disastrous Science with yours truly, Christian Baker. I don't know what the future stores, nor do I know what the next topic of disastrous science will be, but it may be soon, seeing as how my teachers love to pull these projects out of thin air, and no, that is not an insult in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Okay, seriously guys, my name is Christian Baker, and I will see you guys next week, next month, or never again, maybe, depending on Dr. Congreve's lesson plans. Until next time, if there is a next time.
That's a wrap.